Hello and welcome to another video by Rick Miracle, me, in my series Freemasonry and Satanism. Continuing on with my investigation and my observing current events. I've got an exciting video to make, I believe, by someone well known, Jim Marrs. Apparently he died yesterday. So I thought a little tribute would be a video, and I have several of his books. I've already made a video on this book, Jim Marrs, PSI Spies, series number 29. You can go on my YouTube account and find that, Freemasonry and Satanism, series number 29, Jim Marrs, PIS Spies. So, celebrated journalist and author of Alien Agenda, Rule by Secrecy, and the New York Times bestseller CROSSFIRE, unravels the mystery behind the psychic phenomena known as remote viewing. This is where the government and large corporations train people to go into trances, leave their bodies, look into the future, look into the past, spy on enemies, maybe spy on you and me. What can they do with these occult powers? And I've been digging deeply into mysticism and the Kabbalah and channeling. If you've been watching my videos, you've been seeing that. And I intend to continue researching and investigating those issues. Witchcraft, the Illuminati, the secret societies. What do they know that we don't know? So anyways, in lean journalistic style, Marrs uncovers the military program that turned soldiers into psychic spies. Find out what happens when the psychic soldiers use their abilities to unlock the mysteries behind UFOs, time travel, the assassination of JFK, and the Soviet plot to kill Ronald Reagan. Wow. So when I made this video a long time ago, I'm sure I didn't know what I know now. I might have to go back and watch my own video. Read the book. You can see all my tabs in there. That's how I know what I read. Another book I have I've been reading, The Terra Conspiracy, Deception 911, and the Loss of Liberty, Jim Marrs. I've been reading this, so I'll be making a video right away on this book. Both of them will be series 144. So between these two books and a couple more I ordered on YouTube, not YouTube, but abebooks.com, a used book site. I'll have some future videos to make under the series 144. Unless they're a different topic, then I'll give it a new series number. But today, we're going to look at this. Just read a little bit from a particular chapter. But before I do that, I went and did some research on the internet about Jim Marrs, seeing that he did die just yesterday. One of the questions I had in my mind is, was he related to Text Marrs? And I go over Text Marrs material a lot, and I have a lot of Text Marrs books, but apparently they're not brothers or known relations, although they have met and agreed they are probably cousins and that they're both from Texas. And I did find this Coast to Coast Radio remembers Jim Marrs thing on the internet today, so I thought I would read it. Posted in News, August 3rd, 2017. Acclaimed investigative journalist and beloved member of the conspiracy theory and UFO research community, Jim Marrs has passed away. After several years working as a reporter for a variety of Texas newspapers, Marrs achieved worldwide notoriety for his landmark book, CROSSFIRE. The book we're going to go over today, just a little bit, which examines inconsistencies in the official story of the JFK assassination. A New York Times bestseller, CROSSFIRE proved to be so powerful that it served as a basis, along with another book, for the Oliver Stone film JFK. Marrs went on to write a pair of highly influential works in the form of Alien Agenda and Rule by Secrecy. A lot of the things I've been talking about. I watched a lot of Jim Marrs YouTube videos, as well as many others. Spent a lot of hours of my day, almost every other day, if not every day sometimes, focusing on different issues and authors and topics, as well as one of the first books on the U.S. government's remote viewing program with PSI spies. So he's a serious investigator, and if he wrote this, we might want to pay attention to his opinion. All right. In the wake of 9/11, Marrs turned his attention to the tragic event, uncovered a wealth of information which suggested that something was amiss with the official version of events, which was brought together in the book The Terror Conspiracy. Though later books like Rise of the Fourth Reich and The Occulted History and Population Control, again, topics I've been investigating and reporting on, he warned about the surreptitious, some words, and worrisome nature of the New World Order and various ways in which the powers that be seem to be advancing their agenda. Well, a lot of us are learning that. And indefatigable, I love these words on this one. He didn't have any fatigue issues. Researcher Marrs produced a number of additional works in recent years, including a fiction offering titled Sisterhood of the Rose. A fiction offering. A fixture on Coast to Coast, he appeared on the program on over 40 different occasions, detailing his latest findings for Coast to Coast listeners, as well as participating in panel discussions on the JFK assassination and the UFO phenomena. An undisputed giant in the field of esoteric research. I study that a lot and I make videos. Jim Marrs will be deeply missed by his many friends in the paranormal and conspiracy community, as well as the countless readers and Coast listeners who were enlightened by his work. So I thought it would be interesting just to read from some material in the book and share some knowledge that most likely most people don't know who haven't read the book. And he has many books, as we've just learned. So I did pre-read this stuff. As you can see. So let me just read it, throw in my 2 cents, and see how it goes. Nixon, President Nixon, and the JFK assassination. Most Americans remember Richard Milhous Nixon as the only U.S. president to resign his office after the threat of certain impeachment. Few knew of or recall Nixon's connections with the Kennedy assassination, including the fact that Nixon was in Dallas the day Kennedy died, but couldn't recall that fact 3 months later when interviewed by the FBI. Born January 9th, 1913, in Yorba Linda, California, Nixon was a self-made man who reached the pinnacles of power after struggling up from a background of meager financial circumstances. Nixon wanted to attend Harvard like young Kennedy, but was forced to settle in California's Whittier College, where he honed his skills as a debater. He went on to graduate from Duke University Law School in Durham, North Carolina, then unsuccessfully tried to join the FBI. Well, that's an interesting background. Shortly after Pearl Harbor, Nixon took a job with the tire rationing department of the Office of Price Administration in Washington. It is interesting that Nixon's lifelong friend, Florida entrepreneurial Charles B.B. Rebozo, began his profitable career selling recapped tires. It's amazing what people can do with their careers when they get in on the different issues involving the government or World War II, FBI, CIA. Although Nixon has claimed he did not meet Rebozo until 1948 while vacationing in Florida after his Hess case, some researchers say the pair were in contact during the war. Later in the war, Nixon enlisted in the Navy and served in the South Pacific, where on one island he built a small shack used for high-stakes gambling and drinking. So it gets interesting, his involvement in the activities about the Kennedy assassination. In 1946, Nixon successfully ran for Congress after labeling his opponent, incumbent Congressman Jerry Vuhus, a friend of the communist. So back then they were accusing each other of being friends in the communist, so they deemed communism to be a bad thing. With his anti-communist credentials, Nixon was immediately named to the House Un-American Activities Committee, where his name became nationally known due to his part in the Agler-Hiss case. All right, I'm skipping over some stuff here. Richard Nixon, in his book, Six Crises Nixon wrote, so he wrote a book called Six Crises. The covert training of Cuban exiles by the CIA was due in substantial part, at least, to my efforts. So was Richard Nixon involved in the Bay of Pigs? This had been adopted as a policy as a result of my direct support. Covert training of Cuban exiles by the CIA. So as we are aware now, they even trained Al-Qaeda to fight the Russian troops in Afghanistan. They created Al-Qaeda. Osama bin Laden, and many other organizations, apparently even including ISIS, that's battling Syria today. It's funny how all this involvement works out, but the people don't know. But if you go get books like this from Jim Marrs, you'll learn a lot. And I don't want to do an audio book. I just want to read a little bit, a few pages, and I encourage people to go buy these books. Rather than bide his time waiting for the next presidential election, Nixon ran against Pat Brown for the governorship of California in 1962. He was handily defeated, especially after news broke of a secret $200,000 loan from billionaire Howard Hughes to Nixon's brother. Guess these elites are connected, you think? Within 2 years, Nixon was back on the political stage, campaigning for Republican candidates. GOP stalwarts repaid this activity by again nominating Richard Nixon for president in August 1968. By then, of course, both John and Robert Kennedy were dead. During the Nixon years, his friends in organized crime were not forgotten. The Nixon administration intervened in at least 20 trials of crime figures, ostensibly to protest intelligence sources and method. So President Nixon was defending criminals. In 1973, Nixon's Attorney General, Richard Kleindienst, denied an FBI request to continue an electronic surveillance operation that was beginning to penetrate connections between the mafia and the Teamsters. The Teamsters, of course, are part of the unions. Neither did Nixon forget his friend Jimmy Hoffa, whom he pardoned in 1971 despite recommendations against such action. So this reminds me of the senior Bush, Prescott Bush, who was involved in financing Hitler, the companies he worked for. And it just used to boggle my mind. Okay, and they were caught, and there was judicial action. I believe they confiscated the corporation. But how did his son, George Bush Sr., get elected president? And then his son, George Bush Jr., gets elected president again after the affairs of the senior Prescott Bush in the involvement of World War II. Just saying, we got people running our world who are not very nice people, apparently. A lot of them come from secret societies, Council of Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, the trilateralism, and many other of these secret societies, high-level Freemasonry. Moving on here, but of all Nixon's possible crime connections, the most intriguing involves Jack Ruby. I was reading this. I learned some very interesting things just reading a few pages. The killer of Lee Harvey Oswald. In 1975, Trowbridge Ford, what a name, Trowbridge Ford, a political science associate professor at the College of Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts, was poring over a stack of recently released FBI documents. Ford was astonished to discover a memorandum written by a Bureau staff assistant to the government panel looking into organized crime activity in 1947. So that would be right after World War II. The memo stated, in my sworn statement that one June Rubenstein, listen to that last name, Rubenstein of Chicago, noted as a potential witness for hearings of the House Committee on Un-American Activities, they were looking into communism, is performing information functions for the staff of Congressman Richard Nixon, Republican of California. It is requested Rubenstein not be called for open testimony in the aforementioned hearings. So this Jack Rubenstein, I would assume he's a Jewish person. And there are good Jewish people out there writing books, trying to warn the rest of us about this new age, new world order. And apparently there are a lot of Jewish people into Zionism and the Kabbalah, mysticism, secret societies, etc. We've been going over that in my videos. Pay attention to the little details here. and his name does pop up again as being important. It is requested Rubenstein not be called for open testimony in the aforementioned hearings. So he was performing information functions for the staff of Congressman Richard Nixon, who apparently had some shady character friends into the mafia and other questionable activities. It's pretty plain reading this book that that's true. But how many people know this? What about other presidents? Donald Trump, when he was running against Hillary Clinton, I was just befuddled. Here's a guy who's into casinos and a real estate mogul and a couple bankruptcies, and I thought America deserves better choices. You think? Just me. That was the most bizarre election I'd ever seen in my life. And we've seen some bizarre ones. Later in 1947, Chicago's Rubenstein moved to Dallas and shortened his name to Jack Ruby. So, and I've mentioned this before, a lot of people like to change their last name so we can't tell who they are. And it's my opinion, after as much research as I've done, that a lot of people, probably in Congress, House of Representatives, and a lot of people who were presidents, had some funny things done in their history to change their last names. And a lot of this has come out in the news. One in particular that got my attention was, I know that Newt Gingrich got a divorce from his wife, the way I understand it, because he was into wife swapping, whatever I read. But it made me remember Rabbi Marvin Antelman's book about the Frankists and the Sabbatins, the people into this Luciferic religion, that they do these sexual deviant things as part of their religion. And I said, well, his last name must equal 666 if he's doing that, because Aleister Crowley changed his name to equal 666, and he was doing that. Just my logical brain. I don't know why I thought that up. And I spent days, Newt and Gingrich. I don't know why I was obsessed or I was pushed to do it by my intuitive self. But finally, after 2 or 3 days, I wound up on Wikipedia and found out his last name was McPherson originally, but when he was adopted, he was changed to Newt Gingrich. So I'm just saying, a lot of name changing has gone out through history so people can hide their true identities. So in this case, Jack Ruby used to be Jack Rubenstein. So when I read things, I also use my brain and think a little bit deeper. The idea that Jack Ruby had worked for Nixon should have set off the national news media. But look at all those official complaints made about Hillary Clinton during the 2016 presidential election. Some of it pretty freaky. Pizzagate, stuff popping up about spirit cooking, child abduction, sex with children, all kinds of occultic activities, intentionally smashing or destroying hard drives, and so much more. Emails that suggest all this deviant activity, but nobody's doing anything about Hillary Clinton. And they're really going after President Donald Trump in crazy ways. Give that guy a heart attack, if that's their intention. Or it's all meant for population consumption, so we the people can yet again be fooled. A lot of people are questioning these activities. So anyways, the world was finding out that Jack Ruby was really Rubenstein and used to work as an information gatherer for Richard Nixon. Instead, FBI officials told Ford, Ford was doing the Professor was going over some FBI documents. Told Ford that the document he discovered was a fake, and the story was quickly dropped. Now that was kind of crazy. So here's this Professor Ford going over recently released FBI documents. Now how could there be any fake documents and that stuff? And he finds out that Ruby and Nixon are connected. Ruby's the one who shot Oswald. And so the explanation to make the story go away is the FBI officials told Ford that the documents he discovered was a fake, and the story was quickly dropped. Look how fast they got all that steel out of the 911 location when the Twin Towers fell. Cut it up into short pieces, locked the area up, shipped it to China for melting. Wouldn't allow anybody to get any evidence. So that happened in the President John Kennedy assassination. And that happened in the 911 event. And interestingly enough, some similar names pop up. And groups like the CIA. And who controls America? I keep on reminding people who watch my video. In a heated argument in Israel, Prime Minister Sharon shouted back to his people when they said, "We can't keep taking the Palestinians' land and killing them. The United States will intervene." And he shouted back, "Don't worry about the USA. We control the USA and the Americans know it." So we got secret societies, we got all these occultists, we got these plans for a new age and a new world order. It all does seem connected. And these people are collecting more billions and more trillions, and we the people across the world are slowly sinking, and eventually they're worried we might revolt, and they have plans for population reduction, killing off about 90% of the population on the planet, according to the USA Guidestones in Georgia, America. Go look those up and read it. And apparently put there by the Rosicrucians, the guy who did it, signed it R.C. Christian when I did my research. And it's hard to go get exact proof, but these are the things that I remember reading. So it does seem everything ties together. Stuff I've been going over. So I go into the psychic research. I go into the occult. I go into the secret societies. And these books that once they come out and they're not popular anymore, people might not know about. That's why I go over all these different books. Because I said, I didn't know about that book. I didn't know about that book. And so I read them and I make videos and people go online. They even tell me in my comment section, "Thanks for making those videos. I purchased many of those books." So all I can say is what I'm trying to do apparently is working. Some people are looking into it. And I like to make videos that the regular average guy, having trouble speaking today, can understand. I like to be plain spoken. And I know what I talk about is insightful, and I know a lot of people would rather not think about it. But that's what got us where we are today. And who knows when the big event that starts World War III, which probably already started with 9/11, but when it becomes obvious to everybody that this paradigm shift in reality is about to change really fast into a Hunger Movies game type of world. Of course, in accepting the Bureau's explanation of the memo, one must wonder why a fake document was contained in an FBI files, and how many other such fakes are yet residing with the Bureau. That brings back to my mind another memory. The Oklahoma City building, I believe, had some records, a CIA, FBI office or whatever, because there's a lot of investigations going on about mafia and secret societies and criminals. And also in Building 7, which was not hit by a plane, but free fell like Tower 1 and Tower 2, also housed a lot of investigative ongoing operations. Huh. Who are they protecting? By the early 1980s, Ford told this author, Jim Marrs, he had studied literally thousands of genuine FBI documents and had slowly come to the conclusion that Nixon-Ruby documents, Nixon-Ruby memo, was probably legitimate. Legitimate or not, the matter raises another even more suspicion when viewed with Nixon's presence in Dallas the day Kennedy died. There's some crazy common denominators that pop up in this material. For instance, apparently, George Bush Sr. was in Dallas that day too, and apparently later tried to also deny it. And Nixon was associated with big oil money people, and George Bush Sr. was in connection with big oil money, and apparently President John Kennedy was trying to get rid of some unfair, he thought, tax benefits, which would have cost an estimated $500 million to the oil people. They were getting fabulously wealthy, and President John Kennedy thought the taxes should be the same for them as with other corporations. Anyways, just some interesting little things I learned, which is why I encourage buying a lot of the books that I read and go over. And again, I'm using an average number, but I think 50% of the authors are trying to seriously inform us to try to save America and the world from these New Age, New World Order elitists. And another 50% of the books I go over, I think, is part of the propaganda. So whether it's more trying to help us and less trying to hurt us, whatever, you do have to be discriminate in your reading and understanding what you're reading. You can't just watch a video or a book, let's say on the New Age, and just assume it's all true. Because, a lot of this material is trying to discredit religion, Christianity, call people haters, and get everybody to accept transgenderism and pansexualism and other things that many of us think are crazy. So there is a big battle between the apparently spiritually religious God forces and the anti-God angels fallen from heaven called aliens, Anunnaki maybe, Illuminati, Lucifer worshippers, secret societies. I keep saying that because, that's what it seems to be. Pagan means many gods, and they certainly have enough names for these entities. So we're dealing with people that are in government that come from these controlled secret societies, and they hardly let any decent people in. Sometimes accidentally people get in, like President John Kennedy, who comes from an Illuminati type family background, as described in Fritz Springmeier's book, Bloodlines of the Illuminati. But even people coming up through that path can have a change of conscience, can think they have so much power that they don't have to be following the evil forces any longer and can try to do the right thing. And of course, what happens to them? They get assassinated. What happens to the president of Ecuador, Panama, and other countries all over the world that don't go along? People who were previously supported by the world elitist, like the president of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, or the president of Libya, Gaddafi, and so many more, president of Iran. So the U.S. has been involved in changing presidents And who controls the U.S. again? So when I say the U.S., it's not we the people. We're being fooled 24/7, deceived, beguiled, distracted. All right, so I'm going over this material. So apparently, legitimate or not, the matter raises even more suspicion when viewed with Nixon's presence in Dallas the day Kennedy died. On November 20th, 1963, Nixon arrived in Dallas, where a carbonated bottlers convention was being held. You're going to love the politics here. Like I said, these are invaluable books, Jim Marrs books, as well as many other authors I've been going over. A newsman from the Dallas Times-Herald interviewed Nixon and wrote, "The former vice president arrived in Dallas Wednesday night to attend a board meeting of Pepsi-Cola Company, which is represented by his New York law partnership." Wow. "He plans to leave Dallas Friday morning a few hours before the arrival of President Kennedy. Mr. Nixon said that although he planned to talk by telephone to several Dallas Republican leaders, he had no plans for a formal meeting with them." Interestingly, researcher Richard Sprague examined Pepsi-Cola's corporate records and found no board meeting was held in Dallas in 1963. So he says he was there for this meeting with Pepsi-Cola, but it's not in their corporate records. Okay, why was he there? The connections and politics of Pepsi-Cola deserve serious attention from assassination researchers. The soft drink company's advertising was handled by J. Walter Thompson, the giant public relations firm that also worked to sell Pentagon's brand of peace. So even the Pentagon was employing the same marketing company for Pepsi to market their brand of peace to we the people. So the propaganda machine is real. Why would they have to hire a huge marketing firm to market their plan for peace? Nixon was longtime friends with Pepsi-Cola President Don Kendall, and as president, it was Nixon who opened the lucrative Soviet soft drink market to Pepsi. Hate the Soviets? Love the Soviets? It all depends what they want. Whether they want we the Americans to hate the Russians, or whether they want to make some money with the Russians. Again, it's a big dance for the rest of us. So here Nixon was involved in the opening the lucrative Soviet soft drink market to Pepsi. A Justice Department investigation into the transaction revealed that a high government official had all of the red tape done away with so PepsiCo could obtain the Soviet franchise without any competition. Well, I suspect you or I would be in prison if we tried to get away with such shenanigans. You think? Or if some other country was doing it, it'd be yelling up and down. Pepsi went on to help those who had helped the company. You see how it works? These senators, these House of Representatives, these presidents, these leaders, all these people are not going to help you or me. They give us a good face. But they're going to help the people who supply the money. So they helped Pepsi get into Russia, and now Pepsi, in 1973, President Kendall formed the Save the Presidency Committee, which sought to protect Nixon from the wrath of the Watergate investigations. So Pepsi Corporation formed the Save the President's Committee. So they're helping each other. At whose cost? The cost of the whole country? It is especially interesting to note that Cartha DeLoach, the FBI official who was the chief liaison between Director Hoover and President Lyndon Johnson, later joined Pepsi-Cola. So these corporations become huge, even though they're supposed to be antitrust laws on the books established many years ago to prevent corporations from becoming so huge that they become too big to fall, like what happened in 2008. And they control senators and House of Representatives and governors and presidents so much. And apparently those are the forces that will be in control under the thumb of the elitist, these occultists, when the New World Order comes. With Nixon in Dallas was Pepsi-Cola heiress and actress Joan Crawford. Both Nixon and Crawford made comments in the Dallas newspapers to the effect that they, unlike the president, didn't need Secret Service protection, and they intimated that the nation was upset with Kennedy's policy. It had been suggested that this taunting in the news may have been responsible for Kennedy's critical decision not to order the plexiglass top placed on the limousine on November 22nd. So President John Kennedy ordered them not to put the plexiglass top up, and the day or so before, Nixon's in the news making fun of security. Coincidence? What do you think? Nixon also caused a stir in Dallas when he suggested that Lyndon Johnson would be dropped from the 1964 Democratic national ticket. So President John Kennedy's VP, Lyndon Johnson, now Nixon is saying in the news, or to people that gets reported in the news, that Lyndon Johnson might be dropped upon President John Kennedy's reelection. And the following things that follow, that answers a lot of questions. Quoted in the November 22nd, 1963 Dallas Morning News, Nixon said, "We must remember that President Kennedy and his advisors are practical politicians. Lyndon was chosen in 1960 because he could help the ticket in the South. Now he is becoming a political liability in the South just as he is in the North." So this political liability winds up becoming the president when President John Kennedy is assassinated. And there's talk of him being dropped. You would have thought that President John Kennedy might have seen some of this coming. On the morning of November 22nd, Nixon was driven to Love Field in Dallas, where he boarded American Airlines Flight 82 to New York. Less than 2 hours after Nixon left, Air Force One landed at Love Field with the doomed Kennedy. So 2 hours before Kennedy arrived in Dallas, Nixon flew out. Later on, denying he was in town that day. Which apparently George Bush Sr. was in town that day, and later on said he couldn't recall or denied it. There's documents to that. I've showed it in previous videos. We'll probably be looking at it again when we go over this book in more detail. I'm just reading a couple pages for this video. All right, 3 months later, the Warren Commission asked the FBI to investigate Marina Oswald's, that would be Lee Harvey Oswald's wife, allegation that her husband had tried to kill Nixon during a visit to Dallas. So there seems to be a lot of smoke screens here. The FBI report dealing with Nixon's interview stated, on February 28, 1964, the Honorable Richard M. Nixon, former Vice President of the United States, was contacted by Assistant Director in charge of the New York office, John F. Malone, and furnished the following information. Mr. Nixon advised that the only time he was in Dallas, Texas, during 1963 was 2 days prior to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. It makes you wonder, do these people not think people can check and find out? The question of whether Nixon was merely forgetful or disassembling in his comments to the FBI might have been cleared up by yet another Bureau report entitled Letter of FBI on June 29, 1964 concerning Richard Nixon. However, this document was reported missing from the National Archives in 1976. So earlier we had some kind of fake document discovered in some released FBI files. And now we have this other report missing from the National Archives. How can that be? Why don't you go to I go to the National Archives and try to lift a couple documents. See how that works out. You think there's inside jobs here? Nixon's recollection improved during 1967. So the further time he gets away from this event, his memory improves. Interview with journalist Jules Whitcover. Speaking about the assassination, Nixon said, I was in a taxi cab when I got the news. I had been in Dallas attending a meeting. I flew back to New York the next morning. It must have happened just as my plane was landing. So now he's saying he was in Dallas that day. My cab stopped for a light in Queens, and a guy ran over and said, have you got a radio? The president's been wounded. I thought, oh my God, it must have been one of the nuts. He thought it must have been one of the nuts. We're going to find out that this Lee Harvey Oswald seems to be set up and described as a nut. An hour later, I got to my apartment and the doorman told me that he was dead. I called J. Edgar Hoover and asked him, what happened? Was it one of the nuts? Hoover said no, it was a communist. I talk about the communists a lot, and a lot of people will start giggling and go, there's no communists. They're not involved in socialism. That's not liberalism and progressivism. They're not behind pansexualism and transgenderism. It doesn't all exist. Don't worry about all those rainbows everywhere. Being a little facetious, I know. But it does exist, is what I'm trying to say. It does exist. And if we're going to save the world from the New Age and the New World Order, we need to wake up to the fact it does exist. The secret societies, the Freemason, even Albert Pike, back in the 1880s, the general for the South in the war between the North and the South, the Civil War. The Southern jurisdiction leader of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry exclaims that Lucifer is their deity. The Rosicrucian material I go over says that Sataniel, later called Satan, was the first entity put on the planet, and he was divine, and God made Eve, who was from the water, dirt, and clay, which was human, and they mated and had a son named Cain, who became the first murderer, and Sataniel abandoned Eve, and the Freemasons called her now a widower. I don't think you call a woman whose husband left a widower. So she got hooked up with Adam that God created so she wouldn't be alone. They had Abel. Cain was jealous. Cain slew Abel. Then they had another son named Seth who was human. So you had Seth and Cain. One was divine and one was human. And apparently we, the people on the planet Earth right now, are from two lineages. The divine Satan one and the human one, according to the Rosicrucians. So I'm just trying to say, when you talk about the communists, you're talking about the Zionists. You're talking about these Jewish people who want a Jewish utopia. It's in the Encyclopedia Judaica. I've made videos over it. It's not something you can question. It's in the Encyclopedia Judaica. It's in Dozens of other books I've made videos on. It's in material on Jewish mysticism. It's in the material on Jewish Kabbalah. A lot of people know it. Communism is another name for commune, socialism, and it's a big deception. They don't intend for the world to be better for us. They plan on population reduction, killing off 90% maybe, according to the USA Georgia Guidestones. And so much more material. And who controls the USA? I know I repeat myself. Prime Minister Sharon of Israel said they do, and we know it. Look up what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said in Fink's Bar. You should have a notebook and writing this stuff down and pausing the video. Benjamin Netanyahu in Fink's Bar. Look up what the Samson option is in Israel. You won't believe it. If anybody tries to stop them from this new world order, they plan on pushing the button and firing off those nukes. The Samson option, look it up. Don't believe me. And taking down the world in a flaming inferno. That's how serious this is. Back to the book. I get started. Some people say my videos are a little insightful. I'd like to think they're a little bit truthful. And ignorance is not bliss, contrary to what they would have you believe. The supposed attack on Nixon by Oswald undoubtedly is one of the most ludicrous incidents of the Warren Commission investigation. So apparently there was this testimony by Lee Harvey Oswald's wife that he took the rifle out and he was going to try to kill Nixon. We know that they implicated him in killing Kennedy. So the Warren Commission, which apparently was a big cover-up, brings all these ludicrous incidents in the issue, which says ludicrous incidents of the Warren Commission's investigation on page 271 in this book. All right, I'm going to skip over some more material. As you can see, I'm reading my highlighted portions. Can't read everything. There's a lot of interesting conversation here. Goes on and on about the foolishness of Lee Harvey Oswald's wife testing for in Congress and where Nixon wasn't, trying to shoot Nixon. All right. Apparently, there's this very bad to have this fellow Hunt. This is a conversation. Later that same day, Nixon spoke with Haldeman, again saying, "Very bad to have this fellow Hunt. He knows too damn much." That's what Nixon said. If he was involved, you happen to know that? Hunt was not with the Watergate burglars, but was in radio contact with them from across the street. Huh. If it gets out that this is all involved, the Cuba thing would be a fiasco. So they're tying this stuff in with the Bay of Pigs, Cuba. The CIA was training and arming some Cuban exiles to try to invade Cuba. So apparently Nixon was afraid of an investigation because the stuff about the Cuba and the CIA would get out. It would make the CIA look bad. It's going to make Hunt look bad. And it's likely to blow the whole Bay of Pigs thing, which we think would be very unfortunate, both for the CIA and for the country at this time and for American foreign policy. Just tell him to lay off. So they're worried about American foreign policy, and who controls America? We talked about that. Where do all the elected officials come from? Presidents and other wealthy elitists come from? Secret societies. There are thousands of them all over the world. Pick, make your choice. Bohemian Grove, Rosicrucians, Freemasonry, the Illuminati, Heritage Foundation, Foreign Relations, Club of Rome, and many, many, many more. Knights of Malta, Knights of Columbus. There's many of them, and a lot of them are descendants of families who have been involved in these things for generations. So the elitists get richer, and the rest of us will get poorer. And I was watching Steve Quayle on a video this morning with another famous host, and they were discussing the potential, the likelihood of the economic system collapsing this fall, which is ironic because the Nazi leader and other people on YouTube are predicting Planet Nibiru and the pole shift happening this fall. Seems like every time this year they have these crazy threats of doomsday. So we can't have the information getting out because it would be very bad for the CIA, and apparently they're working for the elitists to keep America in control of the world. And who controls America? So who did the CIA work for? And bad for American foreign policy. And they're deceiving we the people. They give us crazy choices for presidents. Even Obama was trained and mentored in his youth. Which of us people, you or I, gets mentored and trained in our youth? Who is Obama really? That's an interesting question. Who is his dad really? I think I know. But anyways, he was prepared for this. After telling Nixon that the FBI was aware of CIA operatives' involvement in the Watergate affair, Heydleman tells his chief. After telling Nixon that the FBI was aware of CIA operatives' involvement in the Watergate affair. So the CIA was involved in the Watergate affair, and the FBI knew it and was telling Nixon. You think they've fixed the system since then? Be honest. What do you think? You think they've fixed it? You think we have nothing to worry about? It's important to think about those things. The problem is it tracks back to the Bay of Pigs, and it tracks back to some other. The leads run out to people. The leads run out to people who had no involvement in this, except by contracts and connection. But it gets into areas that are liable to be realized. So they really wanted to shut down this investigation, and these people had no involvement except they had contracts to do things and connections. So I guess they did have involvement if they had contracts and connections. So these elitists know what's going on. The only people who don't know what's going on are we citizens, for the most part. What could Nixon and Heydleman have been talking about? Jim Marr's here. Please go buy this big, thick book. 4 fingers almost. How many pages? 600 plus pages. What could Nixon and Heydleman been talking about? The whole Bay of Pigs thing had been over for more than 10 years. Nixon was out of office when the actual invasion began, and the assault's disastrous consequences were a matter of historical record. So I suspect a lot more happened with the Bay of Pig things than we all know. What else is new? A lot of people don't know that World War I and World War II were false flags started, and they were pre-planning to bring the United States into the war way before any incident occurred. It's part of the New Age and the New World Order. I keep saying. Could they have been circuitously referring to an interlocking connections between the CIA agents, anti-Castro Cubans, and monsters that likely resulted in the Kennedy mobsters that likely resulted in the Kennedy assassination? So apparently Kennedy was in the way, which we already know in his famous speech when he said, "Secret societies are repugnant to the American way of life, and I intend to expose it." And he was doing a lot of other things that are in this book. All right, did they themselves have some sort of insider knowledge of this event? Researchers are left guessing. However, it is significant to recall that when Hunt later demanded $2 million to keep quiet about what he knew, Nixon agreed and the money was raised. So here's somebody who knew what really happened, the details, and he wanted $2 million to be quiet, and according to this author, who I believe was a sincere, honest researcher, the guy was paid. It may also be significant to consider the number of people connected with the Warren Commission that were hired or considered for employment by Nixon's circle during Watergate. So it goes through a long list of names here, which I won't name. I'm just reading my highlighted portions here. You can pause the computer and see all the names here yourself. Nixon asked Commissioner Counsel Arlen Specter to help with his defense. Specter, now senator from Pennsylvania, when this book was written. When was this book written? A lot of great books out there. 1989. 1990 almost. Stuff you wouldn't know. That's why I read these books and share them and make videos. Books that people would have never found out about. Specter, now senator from Pennsylvania, was the chief architect of the controversial single bullet theory for the Warren Commission. So Nixon's attorney was the one who was coming up with the thing about the single bullet theory that killed John Kennedy. And he's the one that now is going to represent Nixon. He was a protege of Nixon's Attorney General, John Mitchell, and had served as co-chairman of the Pennsylvania division of the Committee to Re-elect the President. This is crazy. Called CREEP, C-R-E-E-P, in 1972. Committee to Re-elect the President, called CREEP. How apropos is that? All right. Commission Attorney David Berlin, still its most ardent supporter, headed lawyers for Nixon. In the final days of Watergate, organized crime investigator D. Moldy revealed that military authorities, including Nixon's chief of staff, General Alexander Haig, began to connect their chief with several mobsters, including Florida's Santo Traficant, believed responsible for setting up heroin routes from Vietnam and making payoffs to Nixon's associates. So I make a lot of explanations in my videos, and I say these elitists are in charge of drugs, heroin, cocaine, marijuana, and I'm reading this book, and the investigators are finding out that that's likely the case. Moldy quoted a Justice Department official as saying, "The whole damn thing is too frightening to think about. We're talking about the President of the United States, a man who pardoned organized crime figures after millions were spent by the government putting them away. A guy who had these connections since he was a congressman in the 1940s. I guess the real shame is that we'll never know the whole story. It'll never come out. Well, go buy this book or Jim Marr's other books. 9/11, Kennedy assassination. Stories need to come out. We can't fix this world unless people are willing to wake up and stand up and do the right thing. All right, continuing on. In a final nose thumbing to the American people, Nixon appointed former Warren Commission member Gerald R. Ford as vice president after the resignation of Spiro Agnew. One of Ford's first public actions was to pardon Nixon of any crimes. The question has been raised, if there was a plot to assassinate Kennedy, wouldn't someone have been aware of it? There are many indications that someone was in the fall of 1963. We have already learned, sometimes when you're reading somebody else's words, they're not in the way that you normally would speak them, so you get a little tongue-tied. We already have learned of many incidents of people with foreknowledge of Kennedy's death, including racist J.A. Milter and Rose Chermany. It also appears that some corporate leaders may have yet been aware of Kennedy's pending fate. So who controls our world? And look what's happening to President Donald Trump now with all these attacks. And I can't say that I'm a big fan of his, especially after picking certain people for his staff, letting loose a huge bomb on Afghanistan right after he was elected. They called it the mother of all bombs. And 59 missiles towards Syria. So a lot of people are saying we've been duped and fooled again. It wouldn't surprise me. All right, in the 30 minutes following Kennedy's assassination in Dallas, the Dow Jones average fell more than 21.16 points. So apparently a lot of money made a killing on Wall Street. An estimated 6 million shares of stock changed hands, wiping out about $15 billion in paper values on the New York Stock Exchange alone. It was the greatest stock market panic since 1929. Remember what they did in 2008. The panic and confusion was such that the Securities and Exchange Commission closed the stock exchange shortly after 2 p.m., more than 80 minutes before normal closing time. It was the first emergency shutdown of the stock market since August 1933. And remember the video I was watching this morning with Steve Quayle, with a financial advisor on a video on YouTube, that they were saying, when do you think this is going to happen? And they said, likely this fall, no later than 2018, that the system will collapse. And the people trying to bring us the new age and the new world order will be the ones responsible for it. Okay. Then when the stock market reopened on November 26, 1963, just 4 days after the assassination, the New York Stock Exchange made a record $21 billion advance. How sick is that? Optimism was off the chart by the elites. More than regaining the losses incurred the day Kennedy died. So, of course, as you know what I'm going to read next, there were a lot of elitists who had already sold their stocks. Some people knew what was happening, just like 911. Does that make your blood boil? It was the biggest single-day rise in the history of the stock market. More huge profits were made. No one has publicly identified the men who made their own private killing in the stock market, but it has been estimated that the profits made just on November 22nd alone totaled more than 500 million one day profit. It has been suggested by at least one author that the immense amount of money which changed hands on November 22nd, 1963, was the motivation behind Kennedy's death. And while most researchers reject this idea, many do believe that certain individuals, using insider information on the impending assassination, could not resist the temptation to profit from their knowledge. And again, go get the books on 911, even Webster Tarpley's 911 Synthetic Terror, and many other ones, or watch the videos, connect the dots for yourself. But apparently this is a modus operandi of these people, and if you can believe that, they're going to do it again. All these preparations they've been making for years for this new age and new world order, they won't stop in their efforts. They will bring us a new age and a new world order. And it will not be pleasant. And millions, maybe billions will die. And whoever is left over will be microchipped and imprisoned according to my research. I think there is one way to avoid it. Well, actually, two ways. One is to talk to God. And I'm not talking about being religious. I'm saying there is a spiritual world. And part of the solution is a spiritual solution. And the other way is for people to wake up and talk to people. They can't get away with it if we're aware. But maybe I'm just speaking to the wall. What do you think? All right. Another overlooked aspect of Kennedy's attempt to reform American society involves money. So here's what Kennedy was going to do. Kennedy apparently reasoned that by returning to the Constitution, which states that only Congress shall coin and regulate money, the soaring national debt controlled by the Federal Reserve, created in secret December 21st, 1913, President Woodrow Wilson, who was controlled by these Zionist bankster Jewish folks, Illuminati types, and they're all not just Jewish. These elites, these thieves and perverted people and murderers controlled Woodrow Wilson, and they created the design for the Federal Reserve, which wasn't federal. And from 1913 onward, up to 2008, they crashed the system 8 or 9 times. And all of we, the people, lost fortunes, families, destruction, economic suffering, hunger, starvation. And apparently, the 100 years before they did it in the USA, they did the exact same thing in Germany. They took over the banking system and crashed it whenever they wanted to. See what this globalism will bring? And even Dr. McCullough, or one of his essays or something on the internet, he was a little upset and saying it's not good for the world. But these globalized organizations, these huge corporations, are closing in and becoming, they're in control of almost all of our food supplies and beverage supplies, beer supplies. And I'm thinking, they don't even have to let loose a biological plague or a nuclear bomb. They can just put something in whatever we all eat or drink tomorrow. Even the name brand for your children's cereal, I'm not going to say it on this video, but go look at the cereal boxes and get your top name brands and go get Fritz Springmeier's book, Bloodlines of the Illuminati, and see if you don't see a bloodline name or two. And even on chemical bottles, cleaners, look at the book, Fritz Springmeier's book, Bloodlines of the Illuminati. And go look at these chemicals. These people have a lot of arrogance. A lot of the names of our counties and Reynolds Wrap. Look, Reynolds is one of the names. DuPont. These people are doing a lot of bad things to we people. Look what they did during the Industrial Revolution, the early days of the USA. You know, shoe factories, manufacturing factories, dumping all those pollutants in our rivers and waters, even in the ground. Even now, you know, they take uranium, waste, and they try to hide it by burying it in barrels when nobody's looking. And apparently they just don't really care, because in 10, 20 years, those steel barrels will have rusted through, and that stuff just leaks out. And they've been finding these incidences. So these corporations hire subcontractors, give them certain amounts of money to dispose of the stuff, but they don't want to know how and where it goes. And they want to privatize everything else in the world right now. What do you think of that? You'd think we would learn as human beings, but maybe we're not as evolved as I think we are. Maybe we still function like monkeys or zombies. Or maybe we should be treated like monkeys and zombies and sprayed like bugs when they're spraying all those chemicals in the sky, chemtrails every day, and electromagnetic pollution. They're doing it every day. It's messing with our minds. It's messing with our cells, our mitochondria. The light bulbs are toxin and poison to us. The blue light, it's destroying us. The fluoride in the water is penile and the calcifying the penile gland. And so much more. I could go on these issues. Genetically modified food, weather control, droughts, terror events. And then they try to preach to us that we're at fault and tell us it's biodiversity, sustainability, global warming, global cooling, planet Nibiru, pole shift, earthquakes, and we humans are causing the earthquakes. Again, how stupid do they think we are? Back to Jim Marr's book. So another overlooked aspect of Kennedy's attempts to reform American society involves money. Kennedy apparently reasoned that by returning to the Constitution, which states that only Congress shall coin and regulate money, the soaring national debt could be reduced by not paying interest to the bankers of the Federal Reserve System. So who are the bankers of the Federal Reserve System? That would be the Illuminati. And who are the Illuminati, even according to some channeled information I've been going over? Apparently they're reptilians, and the reptilians are the Anunnaki. And the Pleiadians are also part of this. So these are the real identities of these aliens and UFOs and gray aliens, as we've seen in Aleister Crowley, who changed his name to spell 666 in a numerology calculator. And he drew pictures of Lamb and Iowas, which looks like a gray alien. Nancy Leader, who channels material from the Pleiadians or the Zetas, look at her website. Those things look like little gray aliens. So apparently we have some sinister beings behind these humans, and maybe there is some kind of combined DNA, different, not all 100% human beings running around who think they're the kings and queens and the dukes and the princesses and more divine, and they think that they're better than the rest of us. It seems like that is the answer. And they're not above murdering people and poisoning and putting mercury in vaccines so children are born deformed and diseased. or creating biological weapons in laboratories and putting it out there, as Leonard Horowitz says in AIDS and Ebola, his book I made videos on, putting it in LA and New York and Africa. All right, so the people control the bankers, Federal Reserve System. We know who they are, the communist, Zionist, Illuminati types. And we've all seen the symbols, satanic rituals everywhere. Apparently the Bible is right. The devil is in the details. Yes, that was a pun. The devil. So they print money and loan it to our government at interest, the Federal Reserve. So this Illuminati organization, which is part of the Zionist, communist, all the secret societies, the people are into the Lucifer religion, print money, loan it to our government, even when they start wars or they instigate wars or they tell the people who work for the government that they put in office to create wars, even like 9/11. To do this, it costs millions and billions, and so they'll loan it to our government for interest. And just like John Perkins in Confessions of an Economic Hitman, the United States has been this deep in debt, and maybe that's why they crash the system every 10 or 20 years, because they can reap it all back. But you can't get the people to wake up. That's what boggles my mind. Okay, he moved into this area on June 4th, 1963. So Kennedy was stepping into the money issue of somebody else controlling our money when our Constitution clearly states that Congress shall coin and regulate money. And can anybody possibly believe that our congressmen and our congresswomen and representatives and all these people are so stupid that they can't do it? The truth is, if they try to do it, they'll get assassinated. They won't be in office. Let's just admit Prime Minister Sharon of Israel is telling the truth when he screamed, "Don't worry about the USA, we control the USA." Let's just admit it. Let's just admit the Encyclopedia Judaica, when I read and made those videos, dozens of hours, 10 or 11, 12, 14 hours of 2-hour videos on the Kabbalah, on Zionism, on communism, on anti-Semitic activities. It tells us that for a couple thousand years we've had these forces operating in the background. And in the end times, the world is supposed to wake up. And remember, our lives are really not so important because nobody gets off this planet alive anyways. But our souls are important. Therein lies the problem. What you do in this life, you get soul growth or soul loss, and apathy and ignorance is bliss, in my opinion, is soul loss. When you watch other people being killed or starving, or you've hoarded some food and the event comes and you shoot people coming up the path so they can't come into your house and eat the food that you and your friends or wife has, you may have gained a few days or weeks to live, but you destroyed your own soul. So I'm more worried about soul growth of people all over the planet. The worst thing these people can do is what Israel has a program called the Samson option, is if they can't get their way to be the aristocrats of the world, they will nuke everything with their missiles. And there's talk about that since President Donald Trump was elected. The fear is out there. So anyways, President John Kennedy got into the money question by signing Executive Order 11, 1110, 11-110, 11,000, 1100. which called for the issuance of $4,292,893,815 in U.S. notes through the U.S. Treasury rather than the traditional Federal Reserve system. The same day, Kennedy signed a bill changing the backing of the $1 and $2 bills from silver to gold, adding strength to the weakened U.S. currency. Now, I've said this once, and I'll say it again, and I'll say it again. Can you imagine the world we would live in if we didn't have these evil forces behind the scenes causing all this suffering and destruction so that these individuals can become wealthy beyond belief, live in opulence, purchase human slaves, perverted activities to children, sacrificing people in their Luciferic rituals, causing wars and destruction, even inventing biological weapons in laboratories and everything else? Can you just even boggle your mind and think for a minute what our world would be like if these people weren't on planet Earth? Can you fathom it? Maybe my next reincarnation, I'll be on a planet and these entities won't be on it. They're talking about some kind of ascension. And apparently some kind of Earth will go through some magnetic wave or something. And it'll break into two Earths. I don't know if you ever saw the Superman movie where he broke into two Supermans. One was good and one was evil. The duality thing. Well, they say that's going to happen to the Earth. So apparently all the good people will wind up on one of those evolved planets with the sixth root race. And a lot of the evil people will get to continue to live that they want to. Like animals, like wolves and hyenas. And dog-eat-dog reality and perversions and all that. Then they'll go off on this other planet. And we can wave bye-bye. I know, I'm being silly. But this stuff I read is just too much. One can fantasize, can't one? Kennedy's comptroller of the currency, James Saxon, had been at odds with the powerful Federal Reserve Board, the Illuminati, communist and Zionist Jewish folks. Not all Jewish folks. A lot of Jewish people still adhere to the Ten Commandments in the Bible. And they've been trying to warn us, and they've written many books and gave many famous speeches. Look up Benjamin Friedman's speech, or look up my recent video from Henry Ford's book, The International Jew, and I involved his speech in there. And then on my media and press releases video 2017, I also included that speech. So these are recent videos I made. Benjamin Friedman, famous speech. You got to listen to him. He's a famous Jewish man in New York. He was well connected, knows everything, and he's saying the things that I'm saying. Okay. So they're at odds with the powerful Federal Reserve Board. So Kennedy wasn't making any friends. He had the oil people against him. He had people who were involved with the Bay of Pigs against him. They were planning to let go his VP. And the Federal Reserve Board knew he was going to try to get the U.S. to make its own money, which would be interest-free. Yes, he had some enemies, and apparently these forces were willing to work in cahoots with each other, and apparently the CIA worked for these corporations and these organizations because that's where the money is. Like I said, they use these secret societies to recruit people, so they have to find out if people are either good or bad. You can get into the Freemasons, and if you're not a bad person, it seems, willing to go along with the Lucifer path, then you'll stay in the Freemasons and you'll be part of the social group and you'll pay your dues and everything will be great. But you won't move up the pyramid. All right. Encouraging broader investment and lending powers for banks which were not part of the Federal Reserve System. Saxon also had decided that non-reserve banks could underwrite state and local general obligation bonds, again weakening the dominant Federal Reserve banks. And FYI, in the last couple hundred years, the United States has tried to get from under the thumb of the banksters. And even in the 1800s, there was a USA bankruptcy. So this issue has been going on for a long time. And apparently was going on in other countries by the same Illuminati, Zionist, Communist, apparently Anunnaki, Palladian, reptilian, gray aliens forces behind the scenes with all their symbols. Some of us think of as Lucifer, Satanism, Ra, Moloch, Baal. Remember they were trying to put up the Baal, B-A-A-L, statue or archway, I should say, in New York and London, and later on from UNESCO, I found out they were going to put up 1,000 of them all over the world. Why would they be putting up a statue, an archway to Baal? And then they had the statue of the devil in the Oklahoma State building, and there was a bunch of uproar about that, so they decided to move it to Detroit, and it was a big celebration in the streets, which you go look up the pictures, and everybody looked like a bunch of evil witches and beings, like a lot of people you see in your city streets right now, with demons and daggers tattooed all over their bodies. I think there's something going on. This ascension thing's sounding better all the time. The earth all of a sudden metamorphosizing, and off goes the bad people, and the rest of us cruise off this way. All right, a number of Kennedy bills were indeed issued. So some of this money was actually made. The author has a $5 bill in his possession with the heading United States Note, but they were quickly withdrawn after Kennedy's death. So Jim Mars, who died yesterday, says he had one of these bills. According to information from the Library of the Comptroller of the Currency, Executive Order 11110 remains in effect today. Although successive administrations, beginning with that of President Lyndon Johnson, apparently have simply ignored it and instead returned to the practice of paying interest to the Federal Reserve notes. And FYI also, apparently the global warming issue that they say is human caused, that the solution is carbon credits, so they will tax cities, towns, people everywhere for burning wood, using coal, using oil, using any kind of energy. And these same people who control the banking system will collect all that tax. Do you think they can really fool the world's people? It seems to me like they can, and they are, and they will, because I guess we can't expect too many people to wake up. Today we continue to use the Federal Reserve notes, and the deficit is at an all-time high. So if they say we owe 17 trillion, just like if you own 100,000 on your house, if you pay it off in 30 years, you're actually going to pay off around 400,000, depending on the interest rate. So 100 is 4. If we owe 17 trillion, multiply that times 4, 20, 40, 60, 80, because it keeps growing. 80 trillion, 100 trillion, divide that by 300 million people. We all owe more than 100,000, 200,000 each before we're born. What are you going to do? Can you just imagine why they'll have an excuse and say we have to be put in little fenced-in towns like Hunger Games? And how bizarre and what kind of weird world will it be? They love to torture people, seeing people killed. Satanic rituals, will they bring that back? Will there be human sacrifices every day on television, like some of the TV movies they've made? What was that called? Running Man? Soylent Green, will they be putting old bodies when people get older into big vats with other grains and make some kind of cracker? Soylent Green? They've been telling us. We got some really horrible creatures running this planet. You can tell that by just investigating history. The Crusades from 1000 to 1300 AD, 300 years, 8 crusades, 8 times, all the people from Europe, the kings and queens and princes, and the Vatican and all those people, got everybody riled up together and marched across Greece and Turkey, north of the Mediterranean, came down from the north in Palestine, and slaughtered everybody 100%. They had to, because the people back then would take a gold coin and swallow it to hide it. So they would slit open their stomachs to make the guts fall out and check for coins. And the blood would flow out of those stone villages and castles knee deep. 8 times. All the way down the whole coastline. And then 10, 15 years later, some Arab leader would rise up and fight off all the pilgrims, the Europeans, and the elites would get on a ship, sail back home. All the pilgrims, the citizens like you or I, were slaughtered. And then 10, 20 years later, they had another crusade. Did the same thing again, 8 times. You wonder, well, who and what controls this reality? It boggles the mind. All right, moving on. The last half hour. Trust me on this. It's not easy to do this. It does wear you out. And then after I'm finished for 2 hours, I might have a slight sore throat. Then I have to stop making videos for a day or two sometimes just to get back to normal. This stuff is in these books. It's just too much. This is about Kennedy being killed. You can get this book. It has as much important information, Jim Mars, about 911. And I've got many other books. The government training people to use their psychic abilities. What part of this do people not believe? All right, considering the battle over the U.S. money control by a monolithic central bank is at issue that dates back to the founding of the Republic. Some assassinations. Researchers believe Kennedy's little noted efforts to reform the money supply, curtail the Federal Reserve System may have cost him much more than just the hatred of the all-powerful international banksters. And who would they be? The Illuminati, communists, the Zionists. And again, they always say follow the money if you want to know who the criminal is. After World War II, who got the Palestinians' land? The Rothschilds. They even have Rothschild Boulevard over there. They created the state of Israel. And since then, it's been growing and growing and growing. There are maps to show you. Look up maps of Palestine from 46 to 64 to 78 to today. Barely the Palestinians have a couple specks of land left. But that wasn't enough. Then you needed 911 and you're getting all those oil countries, and those people are being machine gunned and bombed, incinerated with phosphorus falling from the sky. Can you even imagine it? And the people who are alive are being shipped to Europe and the United States in the middle of the night. And they have maps now on Yahoo image site. It's called Greater Israel, cutting way halfway through Saudi Arabia, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon. You don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to figure this out. President Kennedy inched further out on a limb with big business on January 17, 1963, when he presented both his administration's budget and a proposal for tax reform that included a tax cut. All right, about 25 minutes to go and I'll finish this. Obviously, I could read on for weeks on a big book like this, but you can go buy the book. That's why I do this Freemasonry and Satanism book review series. I started in 2013 after reading books for almost 10 years. You can't really have a conversation with anybody about this stuff. Too many questions, too many disagreements, too many arguments. It'll give you a headache. All you can do is say, go watch the video, take some notes, do some homework, make up your own mind. Kennedy's tax proposals included relieving the tax burden of low income to elderly persons. Oh my, that's going to get him in trouble. You can't help the poor people. Revising tax treatment of capital gains for a better flow of capital funds, and broadening the base of individual and corporate income taxes to remove special privileges and loopholes, and even to do away with the oil depletion allowance. This action brought the beleaguered president into direct confrontation with one of the most powerful and single-minded groups in America, the wealthy oilmen. Okay, who is the wealthy oilman? Wouldn't that be Rockefeller, Rothschilds, Illuminati people? I've seen a little bit of history. You know what happens to people that are not on the inside? And let's say they found some oil and they were getting rich. Well, let's just say they don't wind up with that money or land or anything very long. Go watch some old movies. They made movies about this stuff. Kidnapping people, middle of the night forcing signatures out of them. There was a lot of this roughness going around before the United States civilized, back in the Western days. Look what Rockefeller, part of the Illuminati, mentioned in Fritz Springmeier's book, Bloodlines of the Illuminati, did in 1910 and 1920s, taking over the medical establishment, discrediting and making it almost illegal to be a homeopathic doctor, curing people with cures and other old remedies, and forcing allopathy on everybody. And then later on, the pharmaceuticals patented all those drugs and herbs and recipes, and now we all have to pay for them. The Rockefellers were into oil. The Rothschilds, and isn't that part of the BP? Oil. So you can't get away from the fact this is all connected. And these people are not benevolent towards the rest of us. Kennedy and oilmen. The history of oil is replete with stories of unbounded greed, business, chicanery, or even violence. I just said that. During 1923, the first major oil scandal occurred when it was discovered that President Warren Harding's Secretary of the Interior, Albert Fall, had accepted money from oilmen in exchange for secretly leasing drilling rights on government land in Wyoming, known as the Teapot Dome. Wow, it must have been a lot of oil to be called a Teapot Dome. By 1933, there were calls for making the vital oil industry a public utility with governmental controls. Well, now you know why they did 911, another reason. They control all that oil and money now. Untold trillions. And they're using it to control the people, depopulate the planet, biological weapons, world wars, and so much more. All kinds of crazy, insane weapons. computerized monitoring systems, cameras in your own house on your TV or cell phone. And who knows what else? Insanity is waiting for us. All right, Albert Fall had accepted money from oil men in exchange for secretly leasing drilling rights on government land in Wyoming, known as the Teapot Dome. By 1933, there were calls for making the vital oil industry a public utility with government controls. Wouldn't it be nice if we people could regain control of our reality? One of the men supporting the move was President Franklin Roosevelt's Secretary of the Interior, Harold Ikes. However, FDR was finally turned against the plan by Texas Congressman Sam Rayburn, Lyndon Johnson's mentor, who faithfully represented Texas oil interest in Washington. Wow, how the dots are connected. Lyndon Johnson, the president after President John Kennedy was assassinated. His mentor was the oil man Sam Rayburn. After World War II, the Marshall Plan began turning recovering European nations away from coal to oil. Refining capacity in Europe tripled in just a few years. In 1950, a secret agreement was reached between the State Department and major oil companies that allowed all royalties paid to Arab nations to be applied as tax credits. So if you had to pay a percentage of the money you got for the oil to the landowners over there in the Arab nations, you could deduct that as a tax credit. Dwight Eisenhower was elected with strong support from the oil industry. Wow, he's got a reputation of some bad deeds. Early in 1953, in one of his first actions, he stopped a grand jury investigation into the International Petroleum Cartel, citing reasons of national security. I think it was Eisenhower who was behind having the German prisoners termed disarmed combatants so they could be executed. Because you can't execute prisoners of war. So what they do is they just change the name. Go look into that. I'll get a book on that. I think I have one or two. There's a horrible state of affairs, and other generals were fighting this. But after World War II, all those German soldiers that were rounded up at the end of the war, put in prisons, gated, fenced-in areas, were all killed. An unbelievable story. The same year, a CIA-backed coup reinstated the Shah of Iran. A lot of people have heard about this. And new oil arrangements were made with Iran. So now, of course, the Israelis are calling for Iran's destruction. You think all this is connected? Ironically, the Iranian coup was masterminded by Kermit Roosevelt, Teddy's grandson. You see how they keep connecting the dots here with these people? We don't stand a chance unless we wake up. Who went on to become vice president of Gulf Oil. So there you go. Now Kermit Roosevelt, Teddy's grandson, now becomes VP of Gulf Oil. George Bush Sr. was into oil. Oh well, Rockefeller was into oil. Rothschilds are into oil. And they control a lot of resources all over the planet. Gold mines, coal mines, copper mines, diamond mines. And no matter how much money they make, the people are treated horribly bad, even in diamond mines where slaves drop and die today. So what do you think the world's going to be like when they pull off their little coup and bring about this new world order, new age, and say that you are at fault for bringing about earthquakes and global warming? Do you think you're at fault? I don't think I'm at fault. It's interesting when I read these books by these famous authors, there's a lot of more questions to be asked while you're reading, if you're thinking. The Suez Crisis in 1956 signaled the end of British and French colonialism in the Middle East, and the major oil companies moved to consolidate their power. While John F. Kennedy became president in 1961, the oil industry felt secure. But President Kennedy then began to assault the power of the oil giants directly from first with a law known as the Kennedy Act, and later by attacking the oil depletion allowance. The Kennedy Act, passed on November 16, 1962, removed the distinction between repatriated profits and profits reinvested abroad. Both were now subject to U.S. taxation. And my real beef with this whole conversation, not that I'm opposed to these corporations making money, but think about this. What are they doing with this wealth? What did Bill Gates say? What did Ted Turner say? What did the prince over there in England say? He said if he could come back as a virus, he would be so happy if he was reincarnated so he could kill everybody. Bill Gates says if they can make the vaccine program more efficient, they'll be able to get the population under control. Ted Turner thinks there's too many people, wants to see lots of people dead. So what I'm saying, with Rand Corporation and so many others, what are they doing with this wealth? For some reason, they turn this wealth into a seething hatred towards the rest of us. They have to be evil, satanic, Luciferic, reptilian, gray alien, Anunnaki, Palladian. It's not me saying this. Go watch my videos reading from books on channeling. Go read the raw material. Jane Roberts, Seth. I'm going to go over all those books again and make second and third parts. I've got to pin this down. Okay, so they now wanted to make those two tax loopholes subject to U.S. taxation. The measure also was aimed at preventing taxable income from being hidden away in the foreign subsidies and other tax havens. And remember, with all this wealth, all these corporations, these are all going to be the entities in charge of the New World Order. They do this so that the government elected officials are not culpable or responsible. They'll blame it on corporate greed. It's a trick. They will own the stocks. They will own the CEOs of these corporations. And these people will be treated like, if they don't do the viciousness required of them, they won't be in those positions. They won't continue to enjoy their wealth, their opulence, their perversions, their harem of paid prostitutes, etc., including sex children and all that. I'm not making this up. You can go look it up and verify it. It's just too much. It boggles the mind, as I keep saying in this video. While this law applied to industry as a whole, it particularly affected the oil companies, which were greatly diversified with large overseas operations. And we already know, they even say the words, even the Pope says it, New World Order, one global currency, one global religion. Well, what kind of religion do you think it'll be? A compassionate one? Treat everybody like you want to be treated? Go look up the fact that apparently the government has purchased 30,000 guillotines. Go look up the passage of Noahic laws. Try to see what's coming. Why are they promoting pansexualism, adultery, pedophilia, Pizzagate, spirit cooking, and all these satanic rituals? It's just too obvious. It involves more than the humanity that we all believe exists. A lot of us we want to be in denial. We don't want to think about it. And I've had people tell me, Rick, something's going to happen, but I'm going to have a good time until it does. And I'm thinking, oh my, don't you know you're a spiritual being? You're going to be responsible for your behavior and your decisions. And Lord knows I'm no saint. We all make mistakes. But people can change. Well, I always thought a lot of things I did was okay. You know, you're out having a pool party, drinking some beer, yelling, having a good time, barbecuing, and just living life. Pass that over to here, you smoke a little weed, people did drugs. I didn't get into heavy drugs. Thank God. But, you know, you thought, okay, this is the way I live. I'm out on the boat. I'm at the beach. But you didn't think it was that horrible. You thought, oh, a lot of people down the street are family values, mommy, daddy, the 3 little kids, the swimming pool. You were safe in your world, even though you might be a partier or you might have done something wrong. It still wasn't an insane world. But now, it's getting so insane, you can't help but see it. The small things matter more now. You go to yourself, man, if I'd only known. Little did I know I'm watching Seinfeld every day, or 2.5 Men, and Charlie or Seinfeld would have a different girl in the bedroom on almost every show. Who pondered that and thought about it and realized that they were doing that to America? The kids were watching it. And so much more. You watched what your kids were watching on the cartoon programs? You might just smash the TV. I've seen some of those cartoons. I think one of them was, I've mentioned it before, I was standing there in the living room at my sister's house, and there were 3 or 4 children, 7, 8 years old, sitting in front of the TV. You know how they do it. And the cartoon character, the bear, Nancy Bear, said to Sally Bear, who are you going out with this weekend? And Sally Bear says, well, I'm going out with Billy Bear. And Nancy Bear says, whoa, you can't do that. Didn't you go out with Vicky Bear last week? And now you're going to go out with Billy? You got to choose. You can't have a girl date and a boy date. And little Sally Bear says, I can do whatever I want. I can go out with whoever I want. This was cartoons back in 2008. I was stunned. I was shocked. And the kids turned around and saw me watching. And you could tell they were slightly embarrassed. They knew what was being said. It wasn't right. It isn't right. But that's another conversation for another day, and that's just my opinion. You don't have to agree with everything I say in my videos. I don't expect people to. But that's my opinion, that I think they're taking this right and wrong thing to the 99th degree. And it's starting to get, if it hasn't already, past that line to be so bizarre that it just makes you sick a little bit. Look at the murder in the Middle East, the bombing, the sulfur, molten lava almost raining on those people in the cities and towns. They're not after mercenaries or soldiers. They're just burning and incinerating and machine gunning everybody, citizens. That's where I'm saying there's this thing about soul growth or soul loss. If people don't get horrified by that and start saying no, so maybe this whole thing in reality that exists in 2017, maybe it is about to hit the fan. Maybe there is a God the way they describe it in the Bible. Maybe everybody is given a choice. So when it's all over, everybody will get in a certain line depending on what they did and what they thought, what action they took, and how they acted after it happened, and how they survived, and who they killed to keep eating or living for 2 days. Maybe it's all about what we do. It's not so much about what happens to you. It's how you react to what happens to you. And doing nothing is not the answer. enough of my rambling. Back to the book. But I'm reading this stuff. What are you going to do? One of the most sacred of the provisions in the eyes of the oilmen was the oil depletion allowance, which permitted oil producers to treat up to 27.5% of their income tax exempt. So I guess if you were making $100 million, you'd like to have 27 million of it tax-free. And we know that the people who control the oil companies are the Illuminati. We know the Illuminati are part of the communists and the Zionists and the people in the secret society, and they plan on a elitist utopia, a Hunger Games type reality. That's what they're doing with all this money. And they control our senators, our representatives, our presidents, and corporations, and natural resources. And many of we, the people, have been destroyed along the way, outright murdered. 8 different depressions caused since 1913, days before Christmas, which is a satanic holiday. It's a solstice. Get it? The sun goes all the way to the south on the 21st. Parks there for 3 days. Then it starts to rise on the 25th. Jesus was born on the 25th. And the same thing with the other solstice. It's a holiday. Go look on your calendar. Go look up witches' holidays. And when they meet in the middle, that's another occult holiday. When it goes from winter towards summer. So you got several of them a year associated with astrological effects. All right. It is estimated at the time that oilmen would lose nearly $300 million a year if the depletion allowance was diminished. Attempts to eliminate or reduce the depletion allowance were rebuffed year after year by congressmen, many of whom were happy recipients of oil industry contributions. Speaking of his Tax Reform Act of 1963, President Kennedy pointed the finger at the oilmen companies, saying, "No one industry should be permitted to obtain an undue tax advantage over all others." Included in Kennedy's tax package were provisions for closing a number of corporate tax loopholes, including the depletion allowance. Needless to say, oilmen both in Texas and elsewhere felt threatened by Kennedy and his policies. Kennedy's use of his personal power against the steel manufacturers had shown them that the young president meant to enforce his will in these matters. So here's what happens when you get a good president. John Carrollton, who for 12 years was special assistant to Dallas oil billionaire H.L. Hunt, reported in 1977, Hunt was often heard by top aides. So this is an oil billionaire. Listen to what he says. See if you can make sense of this man saying this. Often heard by top aides and followers to say that America would be much better off without Kennedy. Here's a guy who has billions. You see the attitude of these people who get the billions and the wealth? Can you see where this is going as they continue to close in on us? Thank you for watching my video, Rick Miracle reporting. And again, I decided to make this video from one of Jim Mars's book because he passed away yesterday. Go watch his videos on YouTube and go on to the websites and find some of his books. He wrote a lot of them. I believe he was a sincere, decent man writing from his conscience. And his contribution to this research is absolutely invaluable.